You opened your paycheck this month, you looked at the number you were supposed to get, and then you looked at the number that actually landed in your account. Somewhere between those two numbers, a chunk of your money quietly disappeared into taxes before you even had a chance to touch it, spend it, or save it. Now picture this. A billionaire made the exact same amount of money you did this year. Same number of zeros. But here's the uncomfortable part. There's a very real chance he paid a smaller percentage in taxes than you did. Not because he broke a single law, not because he hired some sketchy offshore criminal to hide his money in a suitcase. He paid less because the system itself was quietly built, piece by piece, over decades, to let him. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's not some fringe internet take. That's an actual estimate that has come out of the IRS itself, and it suggests the average American taxpayer ends up paying somewhere around 15% more in taxes than they technically should have to, simply to make up for the gap left behind by the wealthiest people in this country, not paying their full share. Think about what that actually means in real terms. That's not an abstract number on a spreadsheet somewhere in Washington. That's money out of your paycheck. That's money that could have gone towards your rent, your groceries, your kid's college fund, your retirement account. You're not imagining it when it feels like you're working harder and somehow falling further behind. There's a structural reason for that feeling, and it has very little to do with how hard you work. Stick with me for the next few minutes, because by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly how that gap gets created, why almost none of it is technically illegal, and most importantly, what it actually means for the money sitting in your bank account right now, today. But before we get into the mechanics of all of this, if you're someone who actually wants to understand where your money goes, how the financial system really works behind the headlines, and why your bank account looks the way it does, that's exactly the kind of thing we break down here on Finance Stories. So go ahead and hit subscribe right now, because this channel is going to keep unpacking the financial systems that quietly shape your everyday life in a way that's actually simple to follow. No finance degree required. Okay, let's get into it. Here's the central question we need to answer today. The US tax system, on paper, was designed to be progressive. That means the more money you make, the higher percentage of it you're supposed to hand over. That's the theory. That's what gets taught in school. So why does it feel like, in practice, the person clocking in for a 9-to-5 job ends up carrying more of the financial weight than the person who actually owns the company they work for? The answer comes down to one distinction that almost nobody ever explains clearly. And once you understand it, you genuinely cannot unsee it. There are two completely different ways to make money in this country, and they are not taxed anywhere close to the same way. The first way is earning income from labor. You work a job. You clock in your hours or close your deals or see your patients. You get a paycheck, and that paycheck gets taxed, often quite heavily, before it even lands in your account. This is what happens to almost all of us. Doctors, teachers, electricians, software engineers, retail workers, truck drivers. If your money comes from your time, your effort, your labor, the government taxes it immediately, every single pay period. No exceptions, no delays. The second way is earning money from owning things: stocks, real estate, businesses, investment portfolios, ownership stakes. And here's the part that changes absolutely everything. If your wealth grows simply because the value of what you already own goes up, that increase isn't even considered income by the tax code until you actually sell it. Until that moment, on paper, it's just a number that went up. Untouched, untaxed, completely invisible to the IRS. Let that sink in for a second. If your salary goes up by $10,000 next year, you get taxed on it immediately, automatically, before you even see it. If a billionaire's stock portfolio goes up by $50 million in a single year, the government doesn't touch a single cent of it, as long as he simply doesn't sell. So the obvious question becomes, how does someone fund a lifestyle of private jets, multiple homes, and yachts off of money the government technically can't touch yet? That's where it gets genuinely interesting, because the wealthy figured out a way to access all of that money without ever triggering the one event that would force them to pay taxes on it. This is sometimes called the buy, borrow, die strategy. And once you understand how it works, you will never look at your own paycheck the same way again. Here's how buy, borrow, die actually works. Broken down into 3 simple steps with no finance jargon needed. Step 1. Buy. A wealthy person buys assets, stocks, real estate, ownership stakes in private companies, art, you name it. These assets sit there and grow in value over time, sometimes dramatically. But remember what we just covered? That growth isn't taxed at all, unless and until it's sold. Step 2. Borrow. Instead of selling those assets to get cash to actually live on, which would trigger a tax bill, they walk into a bank and borrow against them. Think of it like a home equity loan, but scaled up to a level most of us can barely picture. Banks are thrilled to do this because the assets are sitting right there as rock-solid collateral, which makes the loan incredibly safe for the bank to hand out. And here's the part that matters most. Borrowed money is not considered income under the law. You don't pay a single dollar in tax on a loan, so someone can borrow tens of millions of dollars, fund an extremely comfortable lifestyle for years, and the IRS has absolutely nothing to tax because on paper, no income was technically ever realized. Step 3. Die. When that person eventually passes away, their heirs inherit those assets, and under current law, something called a step-up in basis kicks in. The asset's value gets reset to its current market price for tax purposes. That means decades of growth. The entire engine that built that fortune in the first place can essentially vanish from a tax perspective. The heirs can turn around and sell those assets at their new reset value and pay little to nothing on gains that took an entire lifetime to build. Buy, die. No salary required. No realized income. Ever. No major tax bill. Ever. It's a closed loop that simply never touches the part of the system designed to tax you. Now, that strategy alone explains a massive part of the gap we're talking about. But there's another layer to this story, and it's the part that turns the whole thing into a maze on purpose. A huge amount of significant wealth in this country doesn't just sit quietly in a personal checking account where it's easy for anyone to track. It gets moved into trusts, holding companies, and layered legal structures, sometimes domestic, sometimes offshore, in places most of us have never even heard of, that are specifically engineered to make one simple question incredibly hard to answer. Who actually owns this asset? Think about it this way. The government can only tax an asset if it can clearly connect that asset to a specific person. So, an entire industry exists. Lawyers, accountants, wealth managers, estate planners, financial structuring specialists, whose entire job is to build a structure complicated enough that the line between the asset and its owner gets blurry. None of it is necessarily illegal. It's just blurry enough that actually enforcing the law becomes incredibly expensive, incredibly slow. And most of the time, the government simply doesn't have the resources to untangle it, even if it wanted to. This is exactly why estimates put the amount of unpaid taxes from hidden and unreported wealth in the US alone at somewhere around $100 billion every single year. Globally, that number balloons into the hundreds of billions year after year. That's not pocket change sitting somewhere irrelevant. That's the kind of money that funds infrastructure projects, healthcare programs, public schools. The exact programs that affect your everyday life, your community, and your future directly. Now let's talk about how this actually breaks down when you zoom out and look at the entire population, because the gap is even more extreme than most people picture in their heads. If you ask the average person to guess how wealth is actually distributed across this country, most people imagine something fairly balanced. The top group has a noticeably bigger slice, sure, but everyone else still has a reasonable share to work with. That mental picture isn't even remotely close to reality. In actual terms, a small sliver of the population, people who could all comfortably fit inside a single room, holds more total wealth than the entire bottom half of the country combined. Millions and millions of people, all stacked together, holding less than a tiny handful of names you'd probably recognize from the news. And that gap hasn't been quietly shrinking over time. Over the last several decades, it's been doing the exact opposite, expanding faster than almost anyone realizes while it's happening in real time around them. Here's a number that puts this into real perspective. Back in the early 1970s, the richest 0.1% of Americans, just 1/10 of 1% of the entire population, controlled roughly 9% of the country's total wealth. Today, that same razor-thin slice controls somewhere close to double that share. Meanwhile, during that exact same stretch of time, real wages for the average worker have barely managed to keep pace with inflation. So the real question isn't simply why does this gap exist? The real question is, why has it kept getting wider, decade after decade, no matter which party happens to be in office at the time? And this is where it gets genuinely uncomfortable. Because the honest answer isn't really about Republicans versus Democrats, red versus blue, or any of the usual talking points. There's actual academic research on this. Political scientists studied close to 2,000 separate policy decisions over a 20-year stretch, comparing how closely those outcomes lined up with what average citizens wanted versus how closely they lined up with what wealthy interest groups wanted. What they found was striking. The preferences of the average citizen had close to zero measurable effect on whether a given policy actually passed. Meanwhile, the preferences of concentrated wealthy interests lined up with the actual outcome at a dramatically, consistently higher rate. That doesn't mean your vote is meaningless. It means something far more specific than that. On the issues where wealthy interests, as a group, genuinely don't have a unified stake one way or the other. A lot of the cultural debates people argue about online every single day. Your voice and your vote carry real, measurable weight. But on the small handful of issues where wealthy interests are tightly unified, with tax policy sitting right at the very top of that list, the data strongly suggests the outcome tends to land where they wanted it to, regardless of what the broader public actually preferred. Sit with that for a second, because it reframes the whole story. This financial system isn't rigged through some secret room full of cartoonish villains plotting against ordinary people. It's rigged through thousands and thousands of completely ordinary, completely legal decisions made by completely ordinary professionals doing their jobs that all just happen to push consistently in the exact same direction, year after year, decade after decade. Okay, quick pause here. If any of this is connecting some dots for you right now, do me a favor and drop a comment letting me know which part actually surprised you the most. And if you're finding this video genuinely useful so far, go ahead and hit that like button. It really does help this channel keep making videos exactly like this one. Now, let's get back into it, because there's actually a genuinely hopeful chapter to this story. This isn't the first time the country has dealt with a gap this extreme. Rewind all the way back to the late 1800s, a period historians now refer to as the Gilded Age. Industrialists in oil, steel, railroads, and banking built absolutely massive personal fortunes during a time with almost zero meaningful government oversight. By the end of that era, the richest 1% of Americans owned roughly half of the entire country's total wealth. Does any of that sound a little too familiar? That extreme level of inequality eventually triggered a real backlash, widespread labor strikes, sustained public pressure, and eventually, real, lasting policy change. In 1913, the federal income tax was officially established through a constitutional amendment after years of fighting to get it passed. And here's the part of the story that matters most. As that top tax rate climbed higher over the following decades, the concentration of wealth sitting at the very top actually went down, measurably, year after year. By the 1950s and 60s, the top marginal tax rate sat as high as 90%. That exact same period is often remembered today as the golden age of the American middle class. A stretch of time when a single income could realistically support an entire family, buy a home, and still build real savings. Then, starting in the early 1980s, those top tax rates were cut dramatically, again and again, in wave after wave of policy change. And if you track that line against the wealth concentration line on a chart, they move in almost perfectly opposite directions. When the top rate goes down, concentration at the top goes right back up. So none of this is some kind of permanent, unchangeable law of nature carved in stone. It's a policy choice made by actual people at actual moments in time. It's happened before. It's been reversed before. And that single fact means it can absolutely be addressed again. System is one thing, but you didn't click on this video just to walk away feeling frustrated and powerless. You want to know exactly where you actually stand in all of this and what's genuinely within your control? First, let's separate something important right away. None of what we've just covered means that being financially successful is the problem. Building real wealth, owning a business, investing in assets, growing your net worth over time. None of that is what we're talking about here. And none of it should be. The actual issue isn't that wealthy people exist in a society. The issue is when the rules quietly shifts so that one group ends up playing a completely different game than everyone else, while technically using the exact same system, the exact same words, the exact same forms. So, here's what's actually within your reach. Starting today, first, take the time to understand the tools that are already legally available to you. Because some of the same underlying principles the wealthy use exist on a smaller, more accessible scale for regular people too. Retirement accounts, tax-advantaged investment accounts, the strategic use of deductions, you may already qualify for these, exist specifically to let your own money grow with, less of it getting pulled away in taxes along the way. Most people leave this completely untouched, year after year, simply because nobody ever sat them down and broke it down in plain, simple language. That's exactly the kind of gap we're going to keep closing here on this channel. Second, start paying closer attention to where your money is actually being taxed the hardest. If the vast majority of your income comes purely from a paycheck, you're sitting squarely in the category that gets taxed first. Taxed immediately. And taxed the most aggressively of anyone in the entire system. Even small, completely legal shifts, starting a side business, owning a small income-producing asset, contributing consistently to tax-advantaged accounts over time, start to move you, even just slightly, toward the side of the system that actually works in your favor instead of constantly working against you. Third, and this one matters more than most people realize, pay real attention to the policy conversations happening around things like IRS, funding and enforcement resources, when the agency responsible for actually enforcing tax law doesn't have the staffing or the resources to investigate complex high-dollar tax structures. The easiest targets left standing become small business owners and ordinary taxpayers, simply because those cases are far simpler and faster to process. Properly funding enforcement isn't really a left or right talking point at all. It's a basic fairness issue, and historically, it's one of the few areas where sustained public pressure has actually made a measurable, documented difference. And fourth, genuinely consider sharing what you just learned with someone else. Seriously, this one matters more than it sounds. The reason this system has stayed exactly this way for so long isn't because it's some unbeatable, unstoppable force. It's because most people have simply never had it explained clearly enough to even realize it's happening to them in real time. The Income Tax Amendment in 1913. The sweeping reforms that followed the Gilded Age. None of that happened because politicians suddenly woke up one morning feeling generous. It happened because enough ordinary people finally understood the problem clearly enough to demand something genuinely different from the people representing them. So the next time you look down at your own paycheck and watch that number shrink before it even fully reaches you, you'll know exactly why that's happening. And more importantly, you'll know exactly what's actually within your control to start changing, starting right now. If this video helped connect some of these dots for you, go ahead and drop a comment, letting me know which part stood out to you the most. I genuinely read every single one, and it actively shapes what we cover next on this channel. And if you haven't already, take a second to hit that like button, because it makes a real, measurable difference for a channel like this one. If you want to keep going even deeper into how money actually works behind the headlines, go ahead and check out the video appearing on your screen right now. It's the perfect next step from everything we just walked through together here on Finance Stories. I'll see you in the next one.